I've read every Hugo winner from the 2010s. The question is, do they live up to past Hugos, or has the award lost its edge? Are these books worth reading? I'm going to go through each one of them one by one. 2010 had two winners. We're going to start with The City and the City by China Miéville. It's a strange mix of detective noir and speculative fiction. The story follows Inspector Bourlou, a detective in the city of Basel. He's assigned to investigate the murder of a young woman, and what initially looks like a routine case becomes far more complicated when evidence suggests the crime may not be in his jurisdiction. Basel and Olcoma are two cities that exist side by side geographically, but are separated by unwritten rules. The citizens are trained to unsee the other city's people, buildings, and infrastructure. A powerful authority known as Breach enforces the separation. As Bourlou pursues the case, he has to navigate the bizarre political and cultural rules that keep the two cities apart. The book pushes you to think about the things we subconsciously filter out in everyday life. The whole setup feels like a blend of Kafka and Orwell. The absurdity of the city's structure mixed with the Big Brother style surveillance of Breach. But once the story reveals who runs Breach and how it actually operates, I think it kind of loses its impact. When you really break it down, it's fairly simple. You basically have two overlapping districts in the same city, Basel and Olcoma, and the people in each district are forbidden from interacting with the other, and if they do so, they'll be arrested by Breach. I just don't think it's realistic. Breach doesn't want people to breach. Like, the way the city operates, realistically, people would breach every day and the organization would not work at all. So I just think it's an overcomplicated novel. The other book to win in 2010 was The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi. It's set in a future where global warming has raised sea levels, carbon fuels have been exhausted, and bioterrorism has wiped out the majority of the world's crops. Food has replaced oil as the primary commodity. The story is set in Bangkok, Thailand, a city that has effectively shunned globalization, a decision that has created enormous political and economic tension. Closing the borders has prevented global corporations from taking over the country's food supply, but that isolation has also made food insecurity far more widespread. The story follows Anderson, a Westerner brought into work on an energy storage system, but secretly he's working as a spy for a global corporation. His mission is thrown into jeopardy when he gets emotionally involved with Emiko, a genetically engineered human created in Japan but abandoned in Thailand. She's effectively a pleasure slave and servant. The other two main POV characters are a Chinese refugee trying to survive and a Thai government official trying to protect Thailand's borders. The central idea is definitely handled well. If capitalism is the sole driving force behind bioengineering, profit will always come before people. Emiko is the logical endpoint, a human who is engineered, exploited, and discarded when she becomes too expensive. Profit over ethics. The real complication in the story is the dynamic between Anderson and Emiko, a white Western man who becomes obsessed with and wants to save a traumatized Japanese woman who's being brutalized by her Thai owners, is a setup loaded with baggage. I suspect this dynamic was maybe meant to mirror the broader themes of exploitation, since Emiko's sufferings parallel the global economy, but for me it flattened a number of deeply complex issues. I enjoyed the general plot and setup of the book, but the various characters and their interactions with each other I think could have been handled a bit better. 2011, Blackout and All Clear by Connie Willis. So these are two volumes that compose the third book in Willis's time travel series. The story follows three historians who travel back in time to observe World War II in Britain. The central source of drama is that the individuals sent back in time become lost in the past and are unable to return to the present. This is an issue as Willis repeatedly places these characters in scenarios that strain credibility. The three historians belong to an organization dedicated to sending researchers back in time to study the past. The organization is well funded and it provides them with historical knowledge to help them survive and blend in. But the organization somehow overlooks the most basic contingency planning you would expect time travelers to discuss. For example, one character is sent to London during the Blitz and knows which tube stations will be bombed. So she knows dozens and dozens of locations where the bombs are going to hit. Yet there appears to have been little to no discussion about what to do if she becomes stranded in the past It's as if the organization never considered the possibility of someone getting lost in time, despite that being some of the central conflicts of the previous two books. All books follow the same organization, and they are set after each other. I think the focus of the story was supposed to be on the resilience of the British people during World War II. The problem is that the internal logic of the time travel is handled so poorly that all of the characters just either feel dumb or they often speak in a way that feels nonsensical. I think the book was kind of bad. I don't recommend it. 2012, among others, by Joe Walton. The story follows Morwenna, a 15-year-old Welsh girl who has recently escaped her abusive and possibly insane witch mother. She is sent to live with her estranged father and his sisters before being shipped off to an English boarding school. So the narrative is presented through Morwenna's diary, alternating between her lonely daily life at school, her interior world of books, and her reflections on her family. In the diary, she writes about her witch mother, fairies, and other magical elements in a way that leaves you unsure whether she is telling the truth or if she is inventing stories due to her troubled background and isolation. You're really not sure what the truth is until the end of the story. The novel is basically a love letter to science fiction. It's packed with references to a ton of sci-fi books, and since I've read a lot of sci-fi, I caught most of the references, which was fun. Her enthusiasm for books is something I share, but I will say her frequent commentary about how most of the other schoolgirls are dumb and how she's better because she reads sci-fi was a little annoying. It does fit the perspective of the story in terms of we are reading about a troubled 15-year-old writing in her diary, so all of that works. Overall, it's just a bit of a strange read because it seems aimed at older sci-fi readers, but it's kind of weird that it's actually a fantasy book told through the perspective of a teenage girl. And then I do think the book leans heavily on celebrating old sci-fi and the love of books in general, but it feels like it relies on that too much instead of focusing on telling its own story. 2013, Red Shirts by John Scalzi. The story follows Andrew, a new crew member aboard the starship Intrepid. He quickly realizes that something is deeply wrong with his new posting. The away missions have a suspiciously high casualty rate among low-ranking crew members, yet senior officers survive everything. And whenever the ship faces a crisis, lower officers hide and senior officers act in a very strange way. Andrew and his friends begin to investigate, uncovering a truth that threatens to break the boundaries of reality itself. The setup is a loving parody of Star Trek. It pokes fun at the fact that the often nameless red shirts are routinely killed off as a narrative device. The book's premise essentially asks, what would happen if those expendable side characters realized that going on a mission with the main crew, the main characters, was practically a death sentence? The first half focuses on establishing the mystery and watching the characters slowly piece together what's happening. The second half shifts tone as the characters grapple with what it means to exist as a narrative device. The book is highly meta, filled with sharp jokes and plenty of humor, and I found the first half especially funny. I think the problem is the second half didn't land well for me. The jokes at a certain point began to feel pretty repetitive, and I was hoping for a clever resolution to the plot. Instead, the resolution relies on what I think is a fairly common trope now that writers will fall back on when they've written themselves into a corner. I enjoyed the book, but I thought the ending was kind of mediocre, and it also just felt like it could have been more of a novella than a novel. 2014, Accelerate Justice by Anne Leckie. The story follows Breck, a sentient artificial superintelligence that once controlled the Imperial warship Justice of Torin. Breck once controlled the starship and hundreds of human bodies that manned the ship, but due to the ship being destroyed, Breck now lives in a single human body with a fraction of its power. It's on a quest for revenge against those responsible for destroying the ship. Much of the novel alternates between the present and past. In the present, Breck is plotting revenge while stranded on a cold, icy planet. In the past, you learn about the events that led to the downfall and destruction of the ship. So an AI once part of a massive warship, now being reduced to a single body and driven by revenge, is definitely a compelling setup. The novel intentionally remains vague regarding gender and physical descriptions, often making it difficult to determine the gender of various characters. It's an impressive stylistic choice, though it can also make some of the characters feel a bit shallow. I think it works to an extent because the story is supposed to be told from the perspective of an AI, and it makes sense that an artificial intelligence might not focus on people in the same way a human narrator might. On one hand, the book attempts to do a lot of things that are ambitious and intellectually challenging. But on the other hand, central narrative feels rather straightforward. I expected the revenge story of a former AI warship to be more inventive. The weapon she chooses to get revenge, I just kind of rolled my eyes at because it was pretty basic. And at times it felt like the author spent so much energy crafting the novel's structure and framework that some of the side characters and emotional stakes were not really developed. Personally, I enjoyed the last 50 pages because there was actually a fair amount of action. By that point, you know what's going on. I just think the book could have used a little bit more flair to fully capture the reader, because at times it just felt a little dull. And maybe I'm being a little bit too critical because I did enjoy the book. 2015, The Three-Body Problem by Liu Shixin. During China's Cultural Revolution, Yi Wenjie watches her father be beaten to death by Red Guards. Traumatized and disillusioned with humanity, she makes a decision that will change everything. Decades later, Wang Mao is pulled into a secret investigation after scientists worldwide start to commit suicide. So the story goes back and forth between the past and present, and then the two threads converge around a terrifying revelation. Humanity is not alone in the universe. Sides are taken as some believe the aliens are humanity's salvation, while others believe they're coming to invade. Humanity broadcasting our location to the stars could end very badly if there are aliens who mean us harm, and that's kind of what the book is exploring. The scientific elements are handled, I think, with some credibility because the author was actually an engineer at a power plant, and that grounding shows. There's some hard physics that feel earned rather than decorative, and I enjoyed the book talking about technological progress as an exponential curve. Since this was written by a Chinese author and part of the setting was in China, it did have a foreign feel which I enjoyed, though the prose is somewhat mediocre, though it's hard to judge too harshly because it is a translated work. I think the larger issue for me is the alien technology. If you're trying to show that humanity might have a fighting chance against the aliens, you kind of need to make their technology at least a little bit weaker, because what's presented definitely makes you feel like, oh, humanity should have no chance. But then there's two other books in the series, and I did read the entire series. I thought this book was actually the worst. I thought the second book and then the third were better, and I thought the third book was the most interesting. N.K. Jemisin won 3 Hugo Awards for Best Novel in a row for her Broken Earth trilogy, The Fifth Season, Obelisk Gate, and The Stone Sky. So it's a dystopian fantasy sci-fi series set on a ruined Earth plagued by catastrophic natural disasters. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis are frequent and devastating, making survival incredibly difficult. In this world, certain people are born with the ability to draw energy from the earth. If you've ever read The Wheel of Time, the power systems feel somewhat similar. These individuals can channel energy and redistribute it by moving the physical earth itself or releasing it as bursts of heat or cold. Once people discover you have this earthbending power, they see you as a threat. The reasoning is that anyone with this ability is inherently dangerous and could accidentally cause massive destruction, which is true as you see it frequently happen in the story. The story centers on Asun, a middle-aged woman with this power. The first book, The Fifth Season, opens with gut punch. Her son is murdered and her daughter is kidnapped. Asun sets off on a journey to rescue her daughter, which becomes the driving force of the story. She remains the central character throughout the trilogy, although the books do feature multiple points of view and various other characters. One of the elements that really sets the series apart is the use of second-person narration. Instead of I or a named protagonist, much of the story is told using you. It's unusual and takes some adjustment, but I think it's executed fairly well. By the end of the story, you understand why it's used. That said, there's a reason most authors avoid it. It's a little jarring. I initially thought this book might lean toward YA, but it's definitely adult sci-fi and fantasy. The first book is way darker than I expected. The first book is mainly used to set the plot and build up our main character. The second book, The Obelisk focused mainly on world building. It felt like Jemisin wanted to expand the side characters and deepen the setting, but by this point, many of the major plot threads had already been established, and Esun had places to be. So the second book felt a little odd, as the main character was very reactive instead of being proactive, which I think killed a bit of the momentum in the story. But this changes dramatically in The Stone Sky, the third book, where a ton of things are revealed, major mysteries are uncovered, and more of the sci-fi elements come into focus. I had a bit of whiplash. The Obelisk Gate felt too slow while The Stone Sky moves almost too fast. The series, I think, could have flowed better if just some of the chapters were redistributed between the two books. I didn't love the series, but I do appreciate how ambitious the series was in terms of its writing style and structure. 2019, The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. The story is set in an alternative 1950s Earth where a meteorite strikes the eastern coast of the US, wiping out a large portion of the population. The impact triggers a climate crisis that will eventually make Earth uninhabitable. In response, it's decided that the space program is humanity's last hope, and a plan must be set in motion to colonize the stars. Our main protagonist, Elma, is a brilliant mathematician and former World War II pilot. She must fight to be accepted as an astronaut candidate amid the sexism of the 1950s. Though I enjoyed the beginning of the story, the issues pop up pretty quickly. The focus on women's empowerment felt front and center, which I would have been fine with if it hadn't been for the fact that the novel opens up and establishes that the Earth is going to become uninhabitable in the near future. Because of that setup, the priorities sometimes felt a little bit off. Elma is focused on the struggle for women's inclusion, being a role model for little girls, and becoming the world's first female astronaut. It often felt like she and many of the other characters weren't really grappling with the looming extinction level crisis facing humanity. And then one of the main plot points involves Elma having panic attacks after public speaking. This is just a bit of a strange choice because Elma's a World War II pilot and the daughter of a prominent military figure. Yet her main struggle is severe anxiety. It creates a strange tension when the story wants you to view sexism as the primary obstacle, while also giving the character a problem that would realistically disqualify her from being an astronaut. If you actually look at the story of the first female astronaut, it's far more inspiring than this book. So how do these books stack up against each other, and which ones do I think have truly held up? Among others is a little ironic since it's actually a fantasy novel, yet it reads like a love letter to classic sci-fi. Red Shirts is a playful parody of Star Trek, though it ultimately relies on a fairly common trope to resolve the plot. I enjoyed both books, but they seemed to prioritize nostalgia over originality, and it felt like the books were riding on the coattails of past sci-fi, which is fine, but I also think it's a little odd that this approach was enough to win the Hugos. Though I do understand the appeal of nostalgia, especially after reading Blackout, All Clear, and The Calculating Stars, both of which show a disconnect between the plot and the characters' reactions. Having the characters' actions make sense within the story is crucial for keeping it grounded and believable. I don't think either of these stories did a very good job in that. The Broken Earth trilogy and Ancillary Justice both experiment with unique storytelling styles. Both were able to offer a story that a conventional narration couldn't achieve. There are plenty of things I could nitpick about both, but I tend to overlook those issues when an author is trying to push the boundaries of how a story can be told, and I think both of these books do that. I thought The City in the City had an interesting storytelling style as well, but once again, I think the book was just overcomplicated. I appreciated what The Wind-Up Girl attempted with its themes of globalization and bioengineering, but the interactions between characters from different cultures felt awkward. And by contrast, The Three-Body Problem handled the cultural blending between West and East pretty smoothly. The plot, structure, and scientific concepts weren't really groundbreaking, but they are engaging and presented in a way that's approachable and easy to follow. Do these Hugo winners measure up when placed alongside the classics of the ward's past? I think Ancillary Justice, The Three-Body Problem, and the Broken Earth trilogy are the books that will hold up. Again, a reminder that books are subjective and this is just my opinion. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought, whether you agree or have a different take. Feel free to share in the comments below. I'm planning on reading all the Hugo Awards for Best Novel, and if you would like to follow along, please like and subscribe.